Behind the iron gates of a billionaire's mansion, whispers turned into warnings. No maid lasted more than a few weeks under the wife's icy glare. Some left in tears, others vanished without a trace of explanation, their stories buried beneath money and influence. The world outside saw perfection, a glamorous wife, a life of luxury, but inside, it was a silent battlefield no one dared to cross. Until one day, a black maid walked in. She wasn't just another servant. She was about to face a cruelty sharpened by privilege, and do the impossible no one believed could be done. The mansion sat like a fortress of power, perched on acres, of land where the grass seemed trimmed with precision and every stone in the driveway glistened under the sun. To outsiders, it was the picture of success, wealth, and untouchable prestige. But to those who worked there, it was a place of dread. The billionaire's wife was known not for her beauty or elegance, but for the cold cruelty that left scars no one could see. Staff whispered about her behind closed doors, about her sharp words that cut deeper than knives, and her unshakable belief that no one was ever good enough to serve her. Maids came and went like shadows. Some lasted a month, others just a week. Their departures were always quiet, their names erased as though they had never been there. Still, desperation always brought new applicants to the mansion, each hoping they might succeed where others had failed. Among them was a black woman named Mariah. She wasn't looking for luxury, she was looking for survival. Bills piled high on her kitchen counter, her children hungry at home, and opportunities scarce in a world where her skin color closed more doors than it opened. When the offer came to work for the wealthy family, she knew the risks, but she also knew she couldn't afford to say no. Mariah stepped into the mansion with cautious hope, unaware that she was about to step into the most brutal test of her strength and dignity. What she didn't know was that, unlike the women before her, she wouldn't just endure the cruelty, she would challenge it in ways that no one thought possible. Mariah's first day inside the mansion was suffocating. The marble floors gleamed so brightly they seemed to mock her worn shoes. Every room carried the weight of money, ornate chandeliers, priceless paintings, and furniture no one dared sit on. The air smelled of expensive perfumes and cold authority. And then came the sound of heels clicking against the floor. The wife, tall, elegant, and impossibly poised, she carried herself like royalty. Her eyes swept across Mariah not with curiosity but with judgment, as though measuring her worth in a single glance. That stare lingered just long enough to let Mariah know she wasn't welcome. No words were spoken, yet the message was clear. You don't belong here. At first the orders were simple, clean this, polish that, but the tone was laced with venom. When Mariah finished her tasks, the wife found microscopic flaws, pointing them out with an exaggerated sigh. Sloppy, she muttered once, though never directly at Mariah. Instead, she spoke as though to the air, making Mariah feel smaller, invisible, yet constantly exposed. Soon the tests became deliberate. She was told to scrub already spotless floors, to rearrange flowers until her hands were raw, to iron sheets so many times the fabric thinned. And when Mariah completed everything perfectly, the wife's eyes still narrowed in disapproval. But it wasn't just the endless demands. It was the silence, pierced with remarks that carried centuries of cruelty. You people never understand quality, the wife whispered one day, her voice sharp and quiet enough to cut. On another, she left Mariah standing in the dining hall while wealthy guests laughed, pointing out the help as though she were part of the decor. Other staff noticed, but none spoke up. They had seen what happened to anyone who crossed. The wife. Dismissals were swift, final, and often humiliating. Some advised Mariah in hushed voices to keep her head down, to endure until she could leave. But leaving wasn't an option for her. With bills waiting and children depending on her, failure meant hunger, eviction, despair. She had no choice but to stay. And yet, every insult, every degrading task, every cold glare planted something inside her, not fear, but fire. The harder the wife tried to break her, the more determined Mariah became not to crumble. She told herself that if she could withstand this storm, she could withstand anything. The mansion became a battlefield. Each day stretched into a test of endurance, each interaction another attempt to strip her of dignity. Still, she endured. Because, unlike the others who had come before, Mariah wasn't just fighting for a job. She was fighting for survival, for her children's future, and for the right to exist in a world that told her she didn't belong. And the longer she stayed, the more the wife's mask began to crack. It happened on a night when the mansion glowed, brighter than ever. The wife was hosting a lavish dinner party, an event where every detail had to scream perfection. Politicians, socialites, and business moguls filled the golden-lit dining hall, their laughter bouncing off the marble walls. Mariah moved silently between the tables, pouring wine, clearing plates, her presence barely acknowledged, except when she was being scrutinized. The wife's eyes followed her like a hawk. Every movement was another chance to criticize. And then, it happened. Mariah placed a crystal glass at the table, her hand steady, but the wife pounced as if waiting for this moment. "Look," the wife announced, her voice loud enough for every guest to hear. "Even the simplest tasks are too difficult for some." She gestured toward Mariah with a mocking smile. "This is what happens when standards are lowered. You can dress them in a uniform, but you can't change what they are." The room went silent. The words sliced through the air, dripping with the venom of racism disguised as refinement. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, others pretending not to hear. Mariah froze, the glass still in her hand. She felt her chest tighten, her throat burn, the humiliation pressing down like a weight meant to crush her spirit. For a brief second, she thought of her children, faces that needed her to endure, to survive. But then, something inside her broke free. She straightened her back, her voice calm but unwavering. "No," she said firmly, her words carrying farther than she expected. The guests turned, startled. "This isn't about standards. This is about cruelty. About a woman so empty she tries to fill herself by tearing others down." Gasps rippled through the room. The wife's smile faltered, her mask of control cracking in front of the very audience she had sought to impress. For the first time, she was the one exposed, her venom laid bare under the glaring light of truth, and Mariah, the maid no one thought could survive, had done the unthinkable. She had stood tall, refusing to be broken. The silence in that glittering dining hall seemed to last forever. No one reached for their glass, no one dared to laugh. The wife, usually so commanding, stood frozen, her face tightening as if the very foundations of her control had been shaken. And in a way, they had. Because for the first time, someone she thought beneath her had spoken truth to her power, stripping away the shield of wealth and cruelty she had always hidden behind. Mariah lowered the glass she was holding and walked away from the table, her dignity intact. Some guests glanced at her with quiet respect. Others looked away, ashamed of their own silence. The wife tried to recover, forcing a laugh, brushing it off as though nothing had happened. But the whispers had already begun. The mask was gone, and everyone had seen the person behind it, cold, bitter, and small. In the days that followed, Mariah didn't know what to expect. She anticipated the worst: dismissal, humiliation, perhaps even being blacklisted from future work. But something unexpected happened. Other staff, who had lived for years under the wife's silent tyranny, began to look at her differently. They no longer spoke of her in hushed tones, but in admiration. She had done what no one else dared to do. She had refused to bow, refused to accept cruelty as the price of survival. And though her time at the mansion came to an end soon after, it wasn't with shame. She left with her head high, her spirit unbroken. She returned home to her children, not with the paycheck she had hoped would solve everything, but with something far more valuable: proof that even in the darkest places, dignity can survive and truth can triumph. The wife remained in her gilded cage of wealth, her reputation slowly corroding as stories spread. Her cruelty, once hidden in silence, was no longer invisible, and for the first time, she was the one left isolated. Mariah's story is more than the tale of one maid against one cruel woman. It is a reminder of something far larger, that racism, arrogance, and abuse thrive in silence, but silence is never the final word. When someone dares to speak, when someone dares to stand tall even in the face of power, the world shifts, even if just a little. So ask yourself, in a world where injustice often hides behind polished walls and smiling faces, who will be the one to stand tall? And when the moment comes, will you have the courage to speak as Mariah did?